Hi everyone, welcome to the session of our web series, Fireside Chat with Champions, in which we interview global business leaders asking them crowdsourced questions relevant to biggest challenge we face today, COVID-19 and its impact on various aspects of business and society, and the ways and means to steer through all these uncertainties. Today we have with us Renard Siew, advisor to the Center of Governance and Political Studies, where he is responsible for advancing the organization's work in field of climate change and sustainability. He has served on climate change and disaster risk management working committee and was co-chair of the United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative's collective commitment on climate action. He is also a member of the World Economic Forum Expert Network and was appointed as the first community champion for Southeast Asian Global Shapers Hubs, while also serving the Climate and Environment Steering Committee as a global lead. He has published in many international referred journals. In 2014, he won a highly commended paper award by the Emerald Literary Network and was inducted into the prestigious Global Young Academy as recognition of his research impact. For his work in sustainability, he was named one of Asia's 21 Young Leaders by Asia Society, a Young Leader by the World Cities Summit, Malaysia's top 10 most inspiring green warriors, and was listed as 50 most prominent green warriors by Asia Tatler. Thanks, Renard, for accepting our invitation. I would request you to let our viewers know a bit more about you and your current interest and activity. The floor is yours, Renard.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deepak, for the kind introduction. So just a little bit about myself and what I'm currently doing. I'm currently an advisor with SUN GPS. It's a non-partisan think tank, and my focus area is very much on climate change advocacy, focusing on both mitigation and adaptation strategies. And our work sort of cuts across multiple layers of society, from working with governments to the private sector, so different organizations cutting across multiple industries, from agriculture, industrial, manufacturing as well. And yeah, on the side, I also run a VC platform, Accelerating Climate Action. So the aim of ACA is really to raise funds to support climatepreneurs, startups, people who are actively seeking solutions, like to the climate crisis that we are currently facing.
Awesome. Good to know your activities, and you're working on something which is very, very critical, because we need to ensure that we live in a healthy environment, and climate change is a very, very critical issue which all of us need to be very, very serious about. And the investment funding and the strategy for the climate change is very, very critical, and you are active in both these areas. Good to know that. Now, as you know, that COVID is unlike anything the world has seen so far, and things would be very, very different post-COVID. You've been someone who has been working closely with, as you said, that startups working in climate change area, those are social entrepreneurs. What, according to you, will be the impact of COVID on the social entrepreneurship, specifically related to the climate-related issues?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, basically a lot of countries are currently in lockdown, and what has happened is that a lot of startups, a lot of corporations are forced to work from home, literally. Well, at least that's the situation in Malaysia, for the past 56 days. Although, like starting from last week, I think the government started to relax on some of this, the movement control order, and we're allowed to go out again. I think for a lot of startups, there needs to be really innovative ways of doing things. So because they no longer have the luxury of going down on the ground, right, to have face-to-face interactions. So on one end, in terms of raising funds or capital for their projects, a lot of it needs to be done through webinars, and that's definitely true for a lot of the pitches or proposals that have come across, at least from ACA's Accelerating Climate Action's platform. In terms of in terms of pivoting as well, like we're seeing actually a lot of smaller startups in Southeast Asia, like working on climate issues, starting to focus on really food security. So, sort of direct impacts that has come out of COVID-19. One of the key questions that people have is, are we going to have enough food supply given, the lockdown situation in order to feed our population? So we are seeing definitely a spike in interest in that particular area as well. And I know Deepak, you work in the agri-tech sector, so perhaps you're also in a better position to explain what you've been doing. But but there's definitely a lot more interest, I suppose, in that sort of area, and just leveraging, I suppose, on technology or digitalization, right, to sort of get the work done, on the ground.
Well, that's perfectly a right explanation, and the challenges in food security. Yes, because we work in agriculture, we get a lot of people talking about the food security, because when you're locked down, you just need two things: good food and internet, right? So,
Yeah.
so food becomes a big challenge. And if you ask me, someone who works in this industry, food security is a more of a challenge of the making of we human beings, because we created supply chains which were so fragile. Farmers are growing food and we are consuming food, so demand and supply both are there. The problem is in between. The supply chains are very fragile, and yes, at many places they are broken for sure. So I would also like to understand, because the COVID is already impacting different sectors and countries differently, right? So you are having those sectors which are having more contact, right, suffering a little bit more than those sectors which are not having contact. For example, tourism or travel industry is suffering, while the digitization is is seeing a lot of green shoots, because a lot of people are now actually doing things virtually on a digital platforms than actually face to face. Now, you have been associated with climate change advocacy for a long. How do you see going forward COVID-19 impacting the thrust to mitigate climate change and existing models on green economy? Here, actually, the reason we're asking you is that actually we are seeing a lot of news report that because of the lockdowns, pollution has surely gone down. Somebody's seeing for 200 kilometers the Himalayas. Somebody's saying that the wildlife is coming in the cities. So we see a lot of those reports. Do you see actually the COVID-19 would be having impact on the way we are doing the advocacy for the climate change?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely spot on. Like, there have been numerous reports, like even in Malaysia, where air pollution index has literally gone down. So air is a lot cleaner, waterways are less polluted, and part of that reason is because when we're in lockdown, there's just lesser traveling. So people are literally staying at homes, and the environment is basically recovering or healing, if you like. Emissions as well has been cut down quite seriously. But I suppose one of the key concerns that most people have is, or at least among environmentalists, is there's been a call for governments to not just give economic bailouts to corporations as a form of free pass, but rather one that comes with conditions, like where we want startups, corporations to make an ambitious commitment towards reducing their carbon footprint. But unfortunately, we don't see a lot of that happening here in this part of the world. I think people are just so caught up in the whole process of, how do we get back to work? How do we, continue to increase productivity, that the environment sort of takes a back seat in this whole, dialogue or predicament that we face. Which is a bit sad, because I think now is really an opportunity for us to make a difference. We have seen that with the lockdown, there have been so many positive benefits on the environment, and really what we should be thinking about is how do we change our current way of working, to adopt a systemic approach, to look at our supply chains, to work with a wide range of stakeholders, right, from governments, think tanks, civil society organizations, collectively to address climate, the problems that we're facing with the climate crisis. Because if we were to delay our actions, at the end of the day, we're not going to change. We are all, creatures of habit. Like, we're just going to go back into our old ways of doing things. And then before you know it, we'll forget that all of this, positive impacts has already happened. So that's, really the landscape of what has been happening at sort of a governance level. And then your second question was also around campaigning, right? Especially for those who are, have been working so hard on the front lines, raising awareness about the climate crisis. So once again, like, we have seen a shift. Like, instead of taking it down to the streets, like, we're seeing a lot more dialogues, webinar, information series, right, happening digitally. So a lot of engagements that are happening are definitely through the use of technology. Like, people are connecting through Zoom, they're connecting through, like Microsoft Teams. And a lot of that sort of awareness raising that has been happening has sort of just gone in that direction.
Right. I'm just trying to add a little bit to the same chain of thought which you are having. See, advocacy needs funding, right? That's very, very critical part of whatever activities we do, especially when it is actually against corporations, right? Every corporation is given an opportunity, except very handful of few who are very, very sensitive about climate issues. They would like to chop off all the forest. They would like to burn everything so that actually they'll be more profitable. Unfortunately, we have seen that happening as a reality, right? Whether you talk about Southeast Asia for growing palm, we have seen what has happened to the tropical rainforest, right? So that's the corporate greed is always there. So they would have their own pressures. Now, because the funding would be constrained, because the government's the CSR fund would be directed more towards healthcare. Do you see that becoming a challenge where actually, for the advocacy, the fund allocation would reduce substantially?
I mean that's really quite an interesting question. We are seeing that, like, a lot of research funding, because I sort of am involved in the research and academic field as well, especially pertaining to climate change. And we are seeing actually a cut in funding. In fact, one of our research centers in Malaysia, Crops for the Future, has actually ended its activities in Malaysia after a 10-year, decade long of operations here, which is a bit sad. And we are, going to see that happening more and more often, like, where people are going to start cutting funds relating to the environmental-based research, just because it's not seen as a priority at this point in time. And I think that's a bit sad as well, because COVID-19, in my opinion at least, it's really a planetary health emergency. I mean, it's not just a health emergency, it's a planetary health emergency. A lot of this is happening because of, our reckless behavior. Like, we have been involved so actively in deforestation. We are cutting down trees, so wildlife is exposed. Like, it brings wildlife closer to humans, and there's this whole zoonotic process, right? Like, of viruses jumping from bats to animal acts and then to us human beings. And we're going to see that happening more and more often, like, if we don't do something about this or take this issue seriously. And we have to change the narrative. I think anything bad that happens to the environment will come back to affect us in one way or another, not just health-wise, but also, we have seen through COVID-19 that, it has led to a lockdown, and economies are essentially going into recession. So the impact is really twofold, triplefold, and it's serious.
Right.
So, it's so important, I think, to, start taking the environment seriously, because, the effects is really systemic. It doesn't just happen in one particular locality. It sort of spreads, across the whole world.
No, I 100% agree with you. And as someone who is working in food and agriculture, we see that deforestation actually creating bigger havoc than COVID itself. And as you rightly mentioned, that actually because we are cutting these forests, we are exposing wildlife too much. and we are not stopping. Unfortunately, like from Southeast Asia, and a lot of people ask this question, right? Why have most of the virus emerged from Southeast Asia? Is it because of the wet market and the eating habits of Southeast Asians? Unfortunately, it is not the eating habit. It is the world which has seen the forest of Southeast Asia being very fertile and trying to actually exploit it. And that is the reason actually you are having this viruses jumping from the wildlife to human beings. And the same thing we are now trying to do it in Amazon. So you'll find that, like, the next wave of viruses would be coming from Latin America, from Brazil, Argentina, and Peru, then Southeast Asia. So that's how the human beings are there. So that brings us to, like, something which is very, very related to what we've been talking about. There is a lot of that needs to be done related to climate change, and you and me, at least we both agree on that. For activities of human beings, sustainable agriculture needs a total rethink. Green energy, I believe the current models are not strong enough to, like, whether the time we are seeing today. We need to revisit the way we are having a wasteful supply chains. Which areas do you see more thrust going forward, as COVID will be impacting all these important issues related to climate change advocacy? So if we have to talk about sustainable agriculture, green energy, and wasteful supply chain, out of these three, how do you prioritize which would be number one or two or three according to you?
Yeah, for me personally, I think food security is definitely at the top of the list, because like population is sort of increasing at an exponential rate. Like, we need to be able to ensure that there's just enough food supply to feed this ever-growing population. So that's definitely issues around land use pressures. So like land is scarce as well. So there's going to be an issue with like where do you grow your crops right next. So there's going to be a lot of innovation in the agriculture sector. Like, people are looking into things like vertical farming, moving into precision agriculture, just because like it's a way to sort of cut down on emissions as well, right? Like, when you are more conservative and more well informed about how to ensure that adequate resources like fertilization, like water for agriculture use, is sort of done in a manner that is careful and cautious, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of innovation in the agriculture space for sure. Also, I think in terms of waste management next, so even through the COVID-19 pandemic, I think there's a lot of waste that is being generated at a household level. Like, you're seeing a lot of the surgical masks that we're putting on, like, they're literally just being disposed, like into rivers, into seas, just just anywhere. And that's going to pose a huge problem. So we definitely need to look into ways in which we can create, a circular economy, like where, we create, we use, and we need to be able to recover that waste so that it's a closed loop, not just use and then dispose off into landfills. As it is in Malaysia, I think we're already running out of landfills, and that's going to be a huge problem. So yeah, like, definitely a lot more innovation in these two areas. But also, when we look at or when we talk about the debate on climate change, right, there's always two different aspects. There's climate mitigation, which looks into how do we cut down on emissions. And then there's climate adaptation, assuming that emissions are already increasing, global warming is happening. How do you then adapt to this scenario? So on the adaptation side, like, we're going to see the green building infrastructure sector really picking up as well. So even in this region, I think there's been a number of tools and frameworks that aims to promote the development of green buildings and infrastructure, which looks into things like energy efficiency, because energy is essentially scope 2 carbon emissions. So we're going to see a lot more of that movement in the adaptation space, and this infrastructure as well is going to be developed in order for it to be able to be resilient to withstand rise in sea levels, right? And then on the mitigation side, we're going to see a lot of innovation in terms of transportation. So recreational vehicles, like, the use of more solar powered equipments being installed, solar rooftops, definitely a lot of move, into the renewable green investment space.
Yeah, so actually, when we talk about the green energy, of late for past couple of years, there have been a lot of questions being raised on the models and as well as the efficiency of the green model itself, right? So when we talk about, as you rightly mentioned, solars, right? Solar provides you energy when actually you don't need it in the daytime, right? Your lighting requirements are very low, and when you need the most, right? That's after 5 p.m. typically, you don't have sun. So you need to store a lot of that energy in the batteries and all that. And batteries themselves, they are a big pollutant themselves. Similarly, if you've been seeing that on the biomass energy, there has been a lot of question being raised that now people have started actually deforesting to create green energy, right? For using the pellets and the wood for actually creating the biomass. Third area is that to create ethanol based energy ecosystem, right? We are again taking away the land for cultivating food and trying to grow actually molasses and sugarcane so that we can create more ethanol. Do you think there is a dichotomy in the way we are trying to address the green energy issue?
I think at the end of the day, it really boils back down to the concept of sustainability, right? So sustainability, we always say that it's very much anchored around three pillars: people, planet, and prosperity, or the economy, if you like. And the idea behind this is, how do you balance up these three pillars? So you want to drive economy through the use of natural resources, but you have to do it in such a way whereby you ensure that there is enough surplus for future generations, right? So that's the planetary limit aspect. How much do you actually mine resources, right, in order to meet the current needs without compromising ability of future generations to meet their own needs? And I think it needs to be built on this three pillars is essentially. If you ask me, would it always be a perfect balance? I don't think so. I think there will be times where the balance might be tipped, but the trick here is that you don't want to make sure that it's so lopsided to the point whereby the whole system collapses and overturns, and that's how I would see it. There's a principle that we use a lot, right? In the UN, we say common but differentiated. So we are all unified in a common ideology, common goal that we want to achieve, but we are differentiated in the way that we do things. And this is especially true when you start comparing between developed and developing countries. Like, there are some nuances in terms of practices that needs to be deployed. But yeah, I genuinely believe that sustainability is key to everything that we do.
No, that's exactly what I strongly believe, that we have to change the habits of consumption. We have to become more responsible citizens of this earth. Also, I have a little bit of concern, though actually it can be a totally separate discussion altogether. When I see 20 years old, 13 years old, 14 years old, their advocacy, I love it, right? That energy is important. But when they start getting into very, very technical issues without the level of research, you have done your PhD to understand these challenges, right? Now, if a 13-year-old start talking about that, how we should be running our energy sector, then it concerns me, because they don't have that body of experience or knowledge, right, to support it. Then it just becomes, I'll say that, a good PR event, not a substantial issue. Now, this brings us to very, very important issue, which I believe we would love to hear your perspective on. Going forward, do you think we as human beings, forget the government, forget the advocacies, we ourselves, we would change the way we are running our activities to ensure that climate change or the challenges related to climate change are mitigated? Do you think humans are smart enough to do that now? Or you still that it will be as usual? Once we are again opened up, again we'll keep on driving, we'll start flying, we'll start over consuming again? Or do you think that human beings would have become a little bit smarter?
Well, for me, I think I have to be optimistic. I work in this area, and it's what drives me, every single day. I hope that, we would come out of COVID-19 in the new normal, being smarter human beings that, would not just think about, how do we improve the economy, but also how do we protect, right, nature and resources, which is, something that's absolutely important, and that we don't repeat the same mistakes that we have done. I think, as we've alluded to or mentioned earlier, we did acknowledge the fact that COVID-19 started because of our recklessness. We were involved in massive deforestation. We destroyed habitats of wildlife, and it sort of facilitated that whole process, right, of this new emergence of this new virus that has affected all of us. If we are not careful, if we go back to our own ways, we're going to see another resurgence of COVID-20, COVID-21, COVID-22, and so on and so forth. And, the question that we need to ask ourselves is, is this the life that, we want to live moving forward? So my hope is that, we change our ways, right? And so just so that, we can leave the world in a much better state than what it currently is. So yeah, I'm optimistic that we will change.
Same with me. I am also optimistic, and now I am more optimistic because you're optimistic, because you being the expert on the subject. So that brings us toward the last section of this discussion. Renard, I would like to because you work a lot with startups as well, as you said, and you are trying to touch the most important issue for human beings, that's climate change. What would be your advice to those who want to or are already working in climate change area as a startup? What 1, 2, 3, or 4 things they should be doing during COVID and post-COVID scenario?
Yeah. One of the things that come to mind is partnerships, right? So no man is an island, and for a lot of startups, and just generally speaking, there tends to be a very competitive nature, like where they're constantly competing for funding. They're trying to outdo some other startups. But in the climate space, in the climate or impact space, one of the things that I found really helpful, and there are even some case studies in Malaysia, is that how some startups or social enterprises have actually started working collaboratively, so or working more closely together to weather the storm, like in this pandemic crisis that we are currently facing. So I think just building up on looking at synergies where you can work together, leverage on one another's resources, and just help each other out. Because at the end of the day, the goal that you're trying to achieve here is that you want to create an impact, a unified, positive, right, goal at the end of the day, and it's something that you can do collectively together. There's a saying, if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you kind of have to go together.
That's awesome advice, and I believe a lot of startup would be very happy to adopt it. And thanks Renard for sharing your insights. As I believe this is a very critical issue, and I always believe the environment is actually not an expense given by our previous generation to us, but a loan to us from our upcoming generation. So we have to be very conscious about how we handle our environment. Thanks a lot for your time, and look forward to collaborate with you in future and do something good for the world. Thanks a lot, Renard. Pleasure talking to you.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Yeah.